First question for this worship time is, who loves to drink water? I guess just plain old, good classic water. Okay, we got a couple of hands. How many don't like to drink classic water? Got a water bottle right there. Got a couple of other hands here. Got some others that are coming up. Yeah, it's like for some people, this is the Holy Grail. This is wonderful. Man, this stuff, in the summertime after you mowed your yard, Mike, it's just so nice to have a cool bottle of water. Pour it over your head. That's what it's good for then, isn't it? But you know what we tend to do with water is we tend to add things to it to give it a little bit of flavor. You know, that's what this thing is right here. It's one of those things you can buy at the store, and man, you give it a little squirt, and here in a second you shake this bottle up, and you've got, this is some sort of like an orange tangerine something. And man, you start drinking this. Now, how many people would prefer this over the plain water? There we go. Got a couple more. There we go. You know, that's what we tend to do with water. Water by itself is pretty bland, unless you're getting it out of a lake, and then it might taste like a fish. You know, by and large, the water we get out of our tap, unless you're real sensitive to chlorine, you really can't, you know, our water's pretty blah. It just exists. We know we need it, so we drink it. But what happens is that for some of us, we change water by adding a little squirt of this magic stuff. By the way, like 0 calories, you know, 0 sugar. I don't even know what it is. It's probably fake. But you add a squirt of this stuff, and all of a sudden, you have something that is a little more exciting to drink. We do the same thing with other things, like tea. You know, what is tea in principle? Water and, well, I wasn't even getting to sweet tea. Yeah, we went straight to the good stuff. I was thinking you go water and tea, or water and leaves. You ever think about that? That's what tea is. It's you grind up a whole bunch of leaves and you put it into the water to sit, so steep. It's kind of a weird thought, but that's what we do. Then we add sugar to it to make it good Southern tea. You know, you start thinking about some of these other things that we go through, and we'd say, well, let's say, water plus carbonation. What is that? I wasn't getting to Dr. Pepper yet. This is just sparkling water. What's the real expensive stuff? That's LaCroix. Ooh, yeah, LaCroix. That's when you get water plus carbonation. Now, let's start adding water plus carbonation plus sugar, high fructose corn syrup, a little bit of food coloring in there and some other stuff, and then what do you get? You got your Dr. Pepper, your Coca-Cola, your Pepsi, your, I think was that a Diet Coke, Bryce? Was that a vanilla Coke? You start getting some of those flavors in. So let's say you take now again water, and you add maybe some corn and some rye and some wheat, and then you get it really hot for a little while and you keep it under pressure for a little while. What do you get then? Don't know. Oh, we're in the middle of Kentucky bourbon country, and that's what you get if you start mixing enough of that. So you take water and you add Jesus to it, and this is what you get. Water plus Jesus equals wine. I found this picture online. I hope you find a good, funny part. The sign above it says water. So Jesus apparently was in the aisle trying to buy water, and it turned over to wine on him. You know, you take something that generally is pretty bland, and you add some stuff to it, and it becomes something pretty awesome. Something that's really, it enhances something about it. It makes it more enjoyable, more delightful. What I look at with the things we do with water, the squirt that we'll add to our water to give it a little bit of flavor, is I realize that boring things become bold when we've added Jesus to it. Boring things become bold. And when I say bold, I'm not talking like strong. I'm talking like it becomes a flavor. It has something to it. And so when I look at our text for today, we're going to spend the next 8 weeks in the Gospel of John looking at the signs that John records to prove who Jesus is. But I realize that in today's lesson, in John chapter 2, boring things become bold when you add Jesus. Let's go through the text together. This will be John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And as we go through the text, we're going to highlight a few things, and I've got one point for us today. And the one point, you've already seen it, is that boring things become bold when you add Jesus. But John chapter 2, verse 1. The third day of the wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. And Jesus and the disciples had been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, as we focus on just this opening line, Jesus is at a wedding, which some people would look at and they say, man, Jesus liked to go to weddings. He was obviously a partier in some way. Maybe he was endorsing the wedding. I think you're overreading it, but that doesn't matter. Jesus was going to a wedding because he was invited. His disciples were there because they were invited. And guess what? Mary is probably a hostess at this wedding, so she's probably kinfolk. You know, when you have a wedding, who are the people that end up working the wedding? Family. Most of the time, we get our family to help out with the wedding because they're free help. That's one thing I always hated about going to weddings, is that after the wedding's over, someone's got to clean up, and the couple gets to go off. But the cleanup's always left with the family. So we're looking at this, and Jesus is probably family to whoever's getting married because Mary is there helping out. And she comes with the problem. She goes to Jesus, which you have to ask why. Why did she choose Jesus? She goes to him and she says, hey, we've run out of wine. Now, mind you, for some people, we have a hard time thinking of Jesus drinking alcoholic wine. If you struggle with that, there's legitimate struggle with alcohol, but if you struggle with that, I'm just going to tell you, Jesus didn't make Welch's in this account. He made the good stuff. We're going to find out in a moment. But Mary comes to Jesus and says, we've run out of wine. This would be horrible. I mean, can you imagine going to a wedding and they say that all of a sudden there's no more food available? There's no more food available. There's nothing for you to eat or nothing for you to drink. This would have been a horrible dishonor to the couple, to the families, because they would have been preparing for this for months. They would have known this was coming. They would have been saving and preparing, and people probably would have been bringing wine with them so that they could say, look, we've got plenty of wine to go around. And by the way, at a good wedding, there was going to be a lot of wine. It wasn't going to be shortchanged here. This was going to be a party. It was probably going to last a week. So they've run out. Jesus has this interaction with his mother, verse 4. Woman, why are you involving me in this? My hour has not yet come. And Mary looks to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you to do. Boy, that's got a lot in it too, because we're looking and saying, was Jesus rude to his mom? I mean, I'm looking back at Lee right now, and I'm imagining if one of the boys or one of the girls walked up and said, let's see, how do I quote this? Woman, why are you involving me? I'm just imagining Jackson going up to Lee right now and saying that, and I can imagine that Jackson would probably be picking teeth up off the floor. You know, this for us, this sounds horrible. It's not meant to be, okay? For us, this sounds really disrespectful. It wasn't. Jesus used the same word woman when he was on the cross, looking down at his mother, was passing off his sonship to John. He uses the same term there. So this is a very endearing, this isn't meant to be a rude conversation. It's meant to be Jesus saying, it's not my time. This is not my role yet. Because he says that. My hour hasn't come. And then Mary, and I don't know if it's defiance, if it's whatever Mary is, but Mary walks over to the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you to do, and she walks off. And then Jesus responds. He says, go fill up these jars. This is verse 6. Nearby stood 6 stone jars for water, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding about 20 to 30 gallons of water. And Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. My cup runneth over. And then he said, draw some of it out and take it to the master of the banquet. So at this point, they have how many stone jars? 6 of them. And you got 6 stone jars, and how many gallons does each jar hold? 20 to 30, so let's cut that in half. Let's cut that in the middle. Let's say 25 gallons. How many gallons of water do we have sitting here in these jars? 100. You're doing 20, aren't you? No, you're not doing 20. 25 at 6. 150. There's my number. 150. I knew I was going to trip somebody with the math problem. 150. You got 150 gallons of water sitting here now. I don't know, this baptistry holds like 1,000 gallons or something like that. So it's a bad comparison. But you got 150 gallons of water sitting here. Huh? Oh, that's a good one. 3 big barrels. 3 big barrels full of water. Jesus says, take some of that, take it to the master of the feast. And then the master, the head of the feast, which was probably a good family friend too, tasted the water. It had been turned to wine. He didn't realize that where it had come from, but the servant knew that. And so he called the bridegroom, the groom, what we'd call him, and he said, everyone brings out the good stuff first. This is the Josh Watkins paraphrase. They bring the good stuff out first so that when their taste buds are a little off after drinking a little bit too much wine, we can then bring out the cheap stuff later. But you have brought out the good stuff at the end. And everyone brings out the choice stuff. So, sorry, I'm looking at the text now, but I'm seeing that as this head of the feast finishes his conversation, you've saved the best till now is his final comment. John switches out of the story for a moment. He says what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs to reveal his glory. So as we see Jesus commanding the servants to fill this 150 gallons of water, there's never a moment that Jesus touches it. There's never a moment that Jesus prays over it. There's not a moment where Jesus interacts in it at all. He says, take a bowl, scoop some out, take it to the headmaster of the feast, give it to him, and somewhere in the process of scooping, filling, pouring, whatever, and getting it to the head guy, it becomes the best wine imaginable. There's a couple of things that we could very easily pull from this story. The first, I think, is that Jesus liked to have a good time. Jesus wasn't afraid of having a good time. He wasn't afraid of a good party. Matter of fact, he was called a glutton and a drunkard by the Pharisees because of how much he got involved in people's lives. So I think we could look at Jesus and we could realize that he wasn't the stuffy guy that we sometimes think of him to be, that he had a good time. He loved life. The second thing I think we could gently catch in this is that Jesus was a part of every aspect of life. It wasn't like Jesus sat in a church building 24/7 doing nothing but churchy stuff and talking to churchy people. Jesus was out in life and he was involved in everyday things. He loved to be with people and he shared those moments with people. And so I see that Jesus could very easily be involved in every part of a person's life. But the thing that I think is most important in this story, the most important phrase that John includes, comes in verse 3. And it's when Mary comes and he says, we've run out of wine. We have no more. Because without that comment, none of the rest of this would have happened. And without that comment, we would have been left to a wedding that would have been any other wedding. But John in that phrase he's not telling us about the wedding. It becomes very easy to look and say, well, this is the wedding, they ran out of drink and so there's a problem and Jesus doesn't want to bring dishonor to the family. No, John's point, and he tells us very clearly at the very end of it, verse 11, where he says this was a sign. This was a sign of the glory of God coming, and what John says in verse 3 here is the most important, is that they ran out of wine. Theologically, what John is saying is that the end of things were changing, that this transformation of Jesus coming into the world was occurring in front of this wedding party's eyes. That the old things, the things that they were used to, the things that they were looking for sustenance, for enjoyment, for celebration, those things were dying. They were drowning out. And what John is saying is that there's a new form of celebration coming. A new time to party, if you will. And so as we're going through some of this text together, what I see the most important thing here is when the wine ran out. You see, for centuries, the way you solved problems was you went and sacrificed. The way you solved problems is you would say your prayers. You would do the things that by obligation the law called you to do. You had to go and sacrifice for the sins that you committed. You had to sacrifice for the bodily functions that you had. You had to do all of these things to make sure that you were right with God. Those were the old wine. But Jesus is bringing in this account in John 2, a new wine, something that's going to bring flavor and excitement and boldness to life. That the boring things of our life are no longer there because Jesus is coming in. And so theologically, what we see happen is that Jesus is bringing a boldness to life that wasn't there before. An excitement that wasn't present in a people until this time. This is the first sign of His glory. The prophets knew this. Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 1. Isaiah 55 and verse 1. Come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy, eat, and drink. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. There was so much wine at this wedding that it would have survived. I mean, it would have been plenty of wine for the rest of the wedding. And here Isaiah is talking about a time, and he says, come because there's going to be so much good, so much that God is going to do. Joel chapter 3, verse 18. And in that day the mountains will drip sweet wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord. What I see in Joel chapter 3 is yet again, Joel is looking forward to a time when wine will flow freely for the people of God. And he's not talking about wine in a glass. He's talking about wine in a spiritual sense. God's blessings to His people. The ability to be in the presence of God. As John says, for the glory of God to dwell among people, verse 11. So when I look at what is happening here, I realize that the prophets were telling a time of God's blessing. And that John is telling us in John 2 that that's what's happening. So here's the question. How does this apply? What does it mean to me? Because theologically, what Jesus was doing was a great sign. It was something very powerful. But what does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? How do I live my life different today because of this? And I'm going to be reminded of our point. Our major point for the day is that bold things, our boring things, become bold with Jesus. You want to say that with me? Let's say that together. Boring things become bold with Jesus. I realize that so often in our lives, we live what I would consider our very boring lives. Now, if you don't feel that way, I commend you for not feeling that way. But let me just go ahead and paint the picture that most of your lives are. Most of you wake up in the morning and you go to work, you go to school, you do whatever you do, and after you do what you do, you go home, you eat dinner, you go to bed, and guess what happens the next day when you wake up? The same thing. It's on repeat. There's not an ounce of difference in any of our lives because all of us do that. And guess what happens after a while? We get in this routine. We talked about this in our Bible class this morning. We get in this routine of where we just kind of run on autopilot. There's nothing that really changes. We just keep going. And our lives are boring. And then someday something happens that snaps us out of it. And maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing. But something happens that snaps us back to reality. And we realize, man, my life is pointless. I go to the doctor's office. I go to my work. I go to my school. I may even stay home and I may do absolutely nothing. But we realize that our lives have very little point to them. Do you ever feel like your life's that way? Let's go back one slide for a moment. Do you ever feel any of the red words describe your life? Do any of the red words describe your life? You see, I realize that for some people, I'm looking at a boring life. We look for substance to fill the boring in our life. Man, we look for drugs to fill the boring in our life. We want some excitement. We look for alcohol to fill the boring or to numb part of what we experience. We look for food to fill this void that we sense within us. And so in the boring state that is our life, we're looking for a substance to fill that void. Maybe it's a relationship that we're looking for. Maybe that's where we find some form of excitement. You know, oftentimes I'm thinking of a wedding in John chapter 2. How many people get married because they're wanting an excitement of something new, something different, and there's not a genuine sense of love? We also in a church will very much promote people to get married, and then we ignore what Paul says when he says, I wish that some people would stay single. We sometimes look at a marriage or as a relationship as a solution to our problems when it's not a solution to the problem. Sometimes the marriage may actually end up being the problem. We look for relationships to solve that. Oh man, and sometimes then we have children. If you get married, you then have children. And when you have children, sometimes those children become what we lean on. We find a hole within our life. We find boringness because all of a sudden it's the same routine with kids. Oh, anytime you have a relationship though, and in order to have kids, there's always sex involved somewhere. And when we realize that sometimes there are people that jump into sexual relationships to have an excitement in their life because inside they're filling a void, if we can fill the void with some form of sexual relationship, then we feel like this excitement, this life. That's why adultery is such a rampant problem. It often starts innocently. But what happens is it creates an excitement within the person to fill the boringness that exists. And so then that excitement fuels further action. Maybe it's the self-help mantra. The self-help mantra. Your Best Life Now is one of the books out right now. I don't know. I haven't read it. I literally Googled. I said self-help books. And then Your Best Life Now, and then there was another book called Self-Love that both popped up as being lower on the totem pole of reviewed books. But I remember thinking when I was looking at these books, thinking what our world teaches. You have voids in your life, and so the way to fill the void in your life is to fill it with a self-help book that can make you feel alive, that can give you, 12 steps to make your life meaningful again. And that's what we believe. We go to the self-help mantras and we say, look, my life feels boring. What do I need to do to make my life meaningful? I put pornography in this category. That's probably a little weird to think about for a moment, but hear me out. Don't we, for those of us who have been in that trap before, use that as a means to feel better about ourselves, and then we become trapped in it? Isn't that something that tends to happen? Yes. All of these are things that are used to fill the void within us that we feel of a boring life. And then finally, religious experience. This is the one that's going to crown the cake. Why? How many of us want things to be different? We want something that's new and exciting. We want revolutionary. We want to step out and we want to be different. And I realize that maybe some of us, even in our religious experiences, are seeking things because we're just bored. And the problem is that all of these things in the red and the white don't really fix boring. They might fix it for a moment within us. We might feel like in some way the solution has been found. We might feel a sense of excitement because all of a sudden this relationship or this self-help book or whatever this substance is, it somehow makes me feel like I've never felt before. Maybe gossip even could fit into that. Gossip tends to occur because I don't feel good about myself, so if I can tear other people down, then maybe, just maybe, I'll feel better about myself. And so maybe even gossip fits into this category. But if you want your life to be full of meaning, do you want your life to have purpose? If you want your life to have meaning, and if you want your life to have purpose, Satan is going to be attacking because he's already attacking every one of us. He is filling a world of self-help mantras and of ideas, and he is doing all of this to distract you, to distract me from what really matters. And what really matters here is that a bold life happens when I bring my boring life to Jesus. And you know what Jesus looks back and says? Carry the water. Isn't that what he said in this story? The boring life is brought to Jesus, water is taken to Jesus, and he doesn't do anything magical over the water. He says, scoop it out and carry it. And if we bring our boring lives to Jesus, he will make something amazing out of them. He'll make something bold and strong and passionate out of those things. So 2 points. Let's go to the next slide for me. 2 points. For those of you who are here today and you realize that your life is boring, you realize that you pull the little squirt bottle of flavor out and you shoot it in your water bottle of life. I'm not talking physical water bottle. You can do this all you want, I don't care. But if you're squirting flavor into your spiritual life, your physical life, if you're squirting something in to make your life have meaning, stop it. The solution is Jesus Christ. The solution is that if you will bring the boringness of your life to Jesus, he will make boldness happen. He will give you a bold flavor. He will do something within you that is most amazing and powerful, and the Spirit's work I don't understand, but I don't have to because I know his power. If you're a person who feels the boringness in your life, bring it to Jesus. And then for those of you, the second category, for those of you who have given your life to Christ, who have said, Jesus, I love you, I proclaim you as my Lord and Savior, I want to do all the things, but you know, sometimes if you're like me, you find that you just slip into autopilot. You slip into boring, and you wake up one day and it's like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing something different. When you find yourself getting bored, let's say it's Tuesday this week, you're at work, you're at school, and you find yourself thinking, what am I doing here? Instead of asking yourself in the boring moment of life, I want you to do this. I want you to stop in the boring moment on Tuesday. I'm thinking Tuesday because I'm thinking that's probably a day you've forgotten the sermon by. So when Tuesday happens, I want you to stop and I want you to say, why am I here right now? For God's sake. Why am I here right now for God's sake? Because you may be the flavor. You may be the flavor that God is using to flavor someone else's life. I don't know why you're there. I don't know why you work where you work. I don't know why you go to school where you go to school. I don't know why you're sitting in the doctor's office for 45 minutes, that you're going to sit in the doctor's office for 45 minutes. I don't know. But maybe you're the flavor that's there for somebody else. And so in those moments where you're finding yourself bored, pray, God, why am I here right now? And let him talk. So the lesson is yours. 2 challenges. The first challenge is if you haven't given your life to Christ, if you are a person who considers yourself in a boring situation of life, Jesus is the only one who can make boring bold. Everything else you can do, it's going to be temporary. You can do whatever you want to, it's going to be temporary. Jesus is the only one that can make boring bold and make it permanent. For those of you who have found the boldness that comes in Christ and you've experienced the love that he brings and you've slipped out of the boldness, you've slipped into boring, when you slip, pray, God, why am I right here, right now? And show me. Ben Hall, I think. Is it Ben, do you have our application prayer? I'm going to invite Ben up for that. After the prayer, if there's something we can do, I'll be down front. Let's pray with Ben.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this lesson. It's always refreshing to hear this, that you are the water. You're the water that quenches us, that keeps us moving. God, we need to hear those words, and sometimes we get consumed with the world and forget these things. We get consumed with just the tools of the world, and sometimes we just lose sight of you. May we not forget that. May we remember that you make us bold, and that we can be bold knowing that your love is in us. And God, may we remember that, because oftentimes we just fail. We fail to remember the love, a love so great that you put your Son on the cross for us. If that's not love, I don't know what is. God, may we take this lesson to heart. May we always remember to turn to you when we're weak, just all the time. And that we always remember that people are watching us as well, that there is a purpose, there is a reason, and that in the end, you're in control. May we take this lesson to heart. May we remember the love that you share with us then and now and through eternity. In your Son's holy name, amen.